We toured primarily in Provence, but there were other sites we also wished to see. We were interested in Arles because of its association with Vincent van Gogh. We wanted to see the Palais des Papes in Avignon. We knew of the structures the Romans had left in southern France, so they were part of our list. Larger towns like Vaison la Romaine, that combined both medieval and Roman history, attracted our attention. And smaller towns away from the madding crowds are always pleasant to visit. The Luberon area, made famous by Peter Mayle in his book A Year in Provence, was to be a centerpiece of our visit. But after I had made all our plans, I read about Europe's greatest Romanesque fortress city, so I fitted it into our itinerary, even though it was not in Provence. Now let's start our tour, primarily in Provence. We flew into Marseilles, picked up our rental car, and drove to the Gîte, or vacation house, we had booked outside of Arles. Our gîte was near Fontvieille, a small town only 10 minutes away from Arles. Nearby we found the first of many great restaurants on our trip, and also a portion of a Roman aqueduct where it crossed a typical minor road. There was much more to see in Arles, starting with the walls, which were originally built in Roman times. The city walls can be seen on this model of the Roman city of Arles. The Roman amphitheater and the Roman theater. In the amphitheater, where Roman gladiators once fought, now demonstration fights are performed for tourists. But Provençal bull games also take place, where the razateurs attempt to remove a ribbon that is suspended between the horns, and occasional Spanish-style bullfights. The Roman theater continues to be used for modern-day shows, as we can see from the stage setup. The Roman bridge over the Rhone no longer exists. But the city end is marked by this lion. The river was a busy waterway in Roman times and continues that way today for both river cruise boats and fishermen. The Roman Forum was the political and social center of the city. In order to level the ground for this important site, the Romans built arches, called the cryptoportique, which is located underneath the Hôtel de Ville, or City Hall, of the modern city. All that is left of the Forum are these columns and half an arch. The Place du Forum continues to be a popular spot, as it also was in the time of the painter Vincent van Gogh. Nearby is the Hôtel d'Arlequin, a 15th century building built on the site of a Roman basilica. Also nearby is the Place République. The Hôtel de Ville is located on this square that was known as the Place Royale, or Royal Square, prior to the French Revolution. And the Romanesque Church of Saint-Trophime. In an illiterate medieval age, the impressive carvings on the main entrance provided religious instruction. This frieze shows the saved being led by church leaders to heaven. And on the other side of the doorway, the damned in chains going to hell. The cloister behind the church contains more carvings. You met Van Gogh earlier at the Place du Forum. A visit to Arles is incomplete without more mention of him. His painting of the hospital courtyard was done while he was a patient there, in a building now called Espace Van Gogh. He also drew this sketch while in Arles. We passed the Abbaye Montmajour daily on our drive into Arles, but we weren't aware of its significant history till we visited there. It is a fortified Benedictine monastery built between the 10th and 13th centuries. The fortified tower was built in the 14th century for protection against rampaging, out-of-work soldiers. It is noted for the 11th to 14th century graves that are carved in the rock. It was an important pilgrimage site during the Middle Ages. Although unfurnished now, the very fine masonry work is still impressive. Carvings in the cloister feature Provençal mythical creatures like the Tarascon that ate humans. Saint-Rémy is an attractive town, smaller than Arles and only 25 kilometers away. It boasts some Roman monuments. But the real reason to visit was to see some more sites associated with Van Gogh. He spent time in the mental hospital of St. Paul here, but he continued to paint, so we were able to see other places where he worked. We visited his room where he could look down on the hospital garden. From his bathroom across the hall, we could look down into the cloister. Les Baux is a Provençal term referring to the rocky ridges on which this chateau was located. The chateau was destroyed when it was finally overcome, but we can still see how it was built on and carved out of the rock. The village nestles below it. The lords of Baux were notorious warriors and remained independent and in control of 80 towns until 1426, when they were incorporated into Provence. As a center for Protestantism in the 1600s, once again they were defeated in 1632 and the castle destroyed. Here we get an idea of the size of this chateau. As we look down into the valley, the red earth we see is a small remainder of the bauxite that was mined in the area. Named after the site, the mineral is the source of aluminum, but the deposits here were mined out. There are examples of medieval war machines, trebuchet, and a battering ram. After lunch with a view, we toured the town. Avignon is only 40 kilometers up the Rhone River from Arles. Near to Avignon is the Pont du Gard. It was built by the Romans in approximately 19 BC as a combination aqueduct and bridge across the Gardon River. The bridge is 360 meters long and 50 meters high, the greatest bridge built in classical times. The aqueduct is on the top or third level. The bridge is on the first level. The bridge is most striking from a distance, but up close, when you realize you are looking at a structure that is over 2,000 years old, you have to be doubly impressed. We followed a path to the upstream side of the bridge for a better view. The river is a popular swimming hole. The third level is fenced off, but we walked across the bridge to the left bank. From where we had other views of this marvelous structure. And then we headed off to our next destination. Avignon is known for the Palais des Papes, the Palace of the Popes, and the famous bridge built in 1185, the Pont Saint-Benizet. We started our visit sur le Pont d'Avignon, on the Avignon Bridge. Although only part of the bridge remains, it originally crossed this branch of the river, the island seen on the left, and another branch of the river further to the left, almost 3,000 feet across. It was an impressive structure for its time, using innovative techniques such as elliptical arches and cutwaters on the supports. From the bridge, we could see the buildings surrounding the Place du Palais. In 1305, a French pope, Clement V, was elected. Due to the urging of the French king and the belief that Italy was too dangerous, the Catholic Church bought the town and moved to Avignon in 1309, taking over the bishop's palace that was located there on a rocky outcropping beside the river. At the back of the palace, we can see part of the rock on which it was built. Over the next 40 to 50 years, the palace was refurbished and expanded. The succeeding popes remained in Avignon till 1377, when they moved back to Rome. But until 1403, there continued to be a second pope, the anti-pope, in Avignon for a period known as the Papal Schism. This room, known as the Grand Tinel, was the elaborate dining area and the ceremonial space where new popes were elected. This large area was the major chapel in the palace, and a smaller chapel. Coat of arms of one of the popes, because the palace was seized and sacked by revolutionary forces during the French Revolution in 1789 and subsequently taken over by Napoleonic forces as a barracks and prison in the early 1800s. The interior was badly damaged and only the impressive architecture and rooms can be seen. And then it was time to find some lunch. Our guidebook recommended L'Épicerie in the quiet Place Saint-Pierre, located close to the palace. Although small, as many restaurants are in France, it was popular with the locals, which confirmed the recommendation. The square is named after the church, whose wooden carved doors include a Native American Indian in full headdress. There are other cardinals' palaces located on the Place du Palais. One of them, the Petit Palais, or Small Palace, an impressive structure, is now a museum with many beautiful works of art. This was our second visit to Avignon, and once again we were looking for a good restaurant for lunch. On the Barthellos Island, on the Rhone River, is the restaurant de Versailles, overlooking the river. We took the free ferry across the river to this very pleasant restaurant, from which we could look back at the Pont Saint-Bénézet. From the island, we could see the garden Rocher des Doms. After returning to the Avignon side of the river, on our way up to the garden, we climbed up on the city ramparts. From here, we get a different view of the Pont Saint-Bénézet. In the garden, we each enjoyed our own refreshment before we took our leave of Avignon. There was much more to see in Avignon, but our schedule required us to move on. The stop at Orange was a slight detour on the way to Vaison la Romaine. The ancient Roman theatre there is the best preserved in the Western Hemisphere. The glass and iron roof over the stage is modern to protect the stage. However, in Roman times, there was a similar roof made of linen to project the actors' voices. We entered through the excavation of the Roman town. The most striking feature of the theater is the stage wall. Originally it would have been covered with marble slabs and decorated with bas-reliefs, carved friezes, statues in niches and columns. Their purpose was not purely decorative, as the projections and cavities in the wall would have helped to eliminate the problem of echoes. The access to the upper galleries for the lower classes was through these tunnel-like entrances. The prominently located statue of Caesar reminded the people of who was the boss. The Romans used the theaters such as these to spread their culture and religion throughout the empire. The wall around the seating area was as high as the wall behind the stage, and it too had a retractable cover. Theaters such as this have been refurbished and continue to be used for modern-day performances. Connected to the modern part of the town by this Roman bridge the medieval section of Vaison la Romaine, complete with chateau ruins, was where our B&B was located, hidden behind the ivy on the left. It is called l'Évêché, the Bishop's Palace, since that is what the building used to be. Wandering the picturesque narrow streets around it occupied much of our time. Nearby, the patio garden of the Hotel Luberon was a pleasant spot for an afternoon aperitif. Beside this alligator juniper, we have only seen previously in Arizona. La Belle Étoile, under the towering medieval city, was another favorite restaurant. On market day, we wandered through the new part of town. And reached the Roman ruins at the far end of town. Entering the Roman theater through the original tunnel entrance, we could see the theater is still in use. After visiting the museum, it was time for lunch at a cafe across the street. Across the main street of town was the village portion of the Roman ruins, from where we could see the remains of the chateau located at the high point of the medieval city. The Roman water supply system is still intact, which fed the Roman bath amongst other places. As well as a beautiful garden, there were extensive ruins to tour. Vaison la Romaine is in the midst of the Côte-du-Rhône wine district. so we did a circuit around the craggy peaks called the Dentelle de Montmirail. The prettiest little town on this drive was Séguret, which means security in Latin. These gates to the town show how seriously security was needed when the town was built. A walk through the quaint, picturesque streets brought us to an attractive square. Leaving the Vaison la Romaine area, we drove up Mont Ventoux, Windy Mountain, which, although only 1,900 meters high, towers over the area. We were amazed at the many cyclists going up to the top of it. Driving along on our way to the Luberon area, we noticed a chateau high on a hilltop, so we searched and found a road to it. It is the Chateau Luberon, a 12th century castle that has been partly restored. Our next planned stop on the drive to the Luberon was the town of Venasque, another quiet but pretty little town. Next stop, the Luberon area, with the famous fields of lavender. Provence, in many ways, is defined by the Luberon, an area enclosed by Mont Vaucluse to the north and the Luberon Hills, from which it gets its name, to the south. It is a small area that has been protected from overdevelopment, so the small towns and rural atmosphere have been retained. Situated centrally between the towns of Roussillon and Gogh, our rural B&B is shown here. Our room on the left, the breakfast area on the right. The only shortcoming was the lack of air conditioning. 2 kilometers away, the town of Roussillon was particularly colorful due to the ochre deposits which were mined from early times. The town square with its mairie or town hall and several restaurants was a pleasant spot to recuperate and people watch. The nearby ochre deposits, although no longer being mined, have a walking tour through them, which we enjoyed one early morning before the heat of the day. The other town nearby, Gogh, with its view of the Luberon Hills and a windmill. Was primarily popular with us for one of its restaurants, La Terrasse. On our way to visit the towns of Beaulieu, Lacoste, and Opède-le-Vieux, we stopped to see a Roman bridge, Le Pont Julien. A bypass around the bridge was built recently. So now the bridge is used for walkers and cyclists, but no horses. Beaulieu is a typical hill town we visited on a market day. And enjoyed the view over a drink. On the walls of one of the houses I found this interesting motto, meaning that the older noble families with pedigrees were still superior, even if other families had accumulated more wealth or power. Across the valley, La Coste boasts an interesting history. The chateau is now owned by Pierre Cardin, the famous designer. As we walk up through the town, many of the buildings are owned and occupied by the Savannah College of Art from the USA. The walk up through the narrow, twisting, ancient streets brings one back to an earlier time. However, you wouldn't have wanted to live here then. This castle was occupied and the town was controlled by the infamous Marquis de Sade, whose name lives on in the perversion sadism. An appropriate sculpture reminiscent of de Sade can be seen outside the chateau ruins at the top of the hill. From up here beside the ruins of the chateau, we can look back at Beaulieu, down on some pleasant-looking homes, and at more of the lavender fields. Opède-le-Vieux was once in an impregnable location, but as times became more secure and peaceful, most of the inhabitants moved to a more accessible town in the valley. But again, the walk up through these steep, narrow streets was interesting. We went as far as the church, which is still in use. As in all towns, there was a small cafe where we could resuscitate ourselves. Traveling through a narrow pass in the Luberon Hills, we visited the very well-furnished Chateau Le Marin. But I was not permitted to video the interior rooms. However, the impressive and pretty exterior hints at the elegance of the rooms inside. We could see the town nearby and found another pleasant lunch stop. The main purpose of our trip on this day was to visit the Abbey Sylvacan, which was originally built in the late 1100s. Restoration of this Cistercian abbey is still ongoing, since it was abandoned during the French Revolution in the late 1700s. The architectural style used by the Cistercian monks was functional and devoid of all ornaments, sculpture, stained glass, or illuminated work that might distract the monks from prayer. Next, we traveled north from our B&B to visit the Abbaye de Saint-Anc, the towns of Gogh and Saint-Saturnin. The Cistercian Abbey de Saint-Anc is still in use by a small number of monks. It is well known for this view of its lavender fields. Entering the church from the rear courtyard, the simple design and lack of ornamentation can again be seen. Gogh is attractive from a distance, but it has been bought up and refurbished by wealthy Parisians and foreigners, with gridlock and parking headaches ensuing. So this was as close as we wanted to go. Near Gogh is one of several Bory settlements throughout France and the world. The name refers to dry stone construction, that is, without mortar, in a Corvel vault design. They date back to 3,000 years ago, but were still in use up to the end of the 1800s. This village contains dwellings with examples of sheep and goat pens and ovens and various other uses. Saint-Saturnin was in many ways my personal favorite Luberon town, possibly because we were well ahead of the tourist season there. The old town, with its church and chateau, sits high above the modern town. The streets pass through tunnels. The present-day church and mairie sit on the main square. And then we headed up to the old church above the town. From the top, we had marvelous views of the surrounding countryside and the town. And then it was time to head back down and find a place for lunch. Medieval Carcassonne is Europe's greatest surviving 13th century Romanesque fortress city. From a distance, the fairy tale silhouette of towers and turrets demands that you visit it. The Porte d'Aude is the back entrance facing the river. The main entrance is the Porte Narbonnaise. From there, we explored the area between the inner and outer walls, known as the Lys. In medieval times of peace, this is where the tournaments and markets were held. In times of conflict, the walls were a strong defense. On the rampart, looking back at the Porte Narbonnaise, portions of the original Roman wall can be seen. The city had been destroyed in 1209 during the Albigensian Crusade against the heretical Christian sect called the Cathars. The northern French who captured the city rebuilt it. What we see today is due to a far-sighted program to restore the city in the 1800s. From the rampart, we see the chateau. And a pleasant restaurant just outside of it. The chateau was the last defensive bastion, as we can see from the defensible entrance. Our tour of the chateau included the main courtyard, the Midi courtyard, the parapet, as well as the rampart that you have already seen, and the museum with pieces from the 12th to 15th centuries. Before we went on to see the Basilica, we found the Comte Roger restaurant for lunch. We were fortunate to hear a Russian chorus singing Orthodox chants in the Basilica. Carcassonne is located on the Canal du Midi, which leads from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic. The Bastide, or New City, was built in the 13th century when the population of the medieval city was evicted, following the successful suppression of the Cathars. We found a restaurant with a spectacular view of the cité, and it was lit up as evening fell. Leaving us with an unforgettable memory of a marvelous visit. If you're interested in the art of Vincent van Gogh, or if you would like to visit 500-year-old and 2,000-year-old history, or if you just want to enjoy good food and wine, southern France, and particularly Provence, is my strong recommendation.